webinar format so we could actually see folks. But if you are not talking, if you could make sure to mute yourself to try to avoid any background noise, that would be great. We're going to give folks a few more minutes to join. So hang tight. We'll get started soon. And also just to let folks know that we are recording today, just so that we have the presentation available for folks to reference in the future, as well as for ourselves. So you are being recorded as a heads up. Okay, so I think we can probably go ahead and get started. Let's see how many folks are on. Let's see. I think to make sure that we don't miss anyone and to make sure we know who's here, we'd like to do have everyone briefly introduce themselves, name, agency, and how, name and agency would be great. I am Rachel Stucker, Executive Director with Housing Alliance, and I'm going to turn it over to, I'll just call on people because I can see everyone's names on the screen. I'm going to turn it over to Matthew with the YW.
Well, I'm Matthew Johnson with YWCA Delaware, and I'll invite Tyler Shade to introduce himself.
Thanks, Matt. Good to see you. Good to see everyone. My name is Tyler Shade. I am the development and marketing manager over here at Family Promise of Northern Newcastle County, and I will pass it on over to Pat.
Somehow I knew you were going to do that, Tyler. Good morning, everyone. My name is Pat Pettaway Ward from YWCA Delaware. I'm going to pass it over to Lisa. Hi, Lisa.
Hello, good morning, everyone. I'm Lisa Forever from Housing Alliance Delaware.
You want to pass it on, Lisa? I think we're doing a pass it along process. Oh, it looks like Lisa might be frozen. So I'm going to pass it on to Devin. Can you hear us, Devin? Yep. Yep, I can hear you.
I'm also on the CoC committee, and I'm happy to see everybody's faces today. I will pass it on to Renewal.
So Devin, I could kind of understand you, but your audio was pretty garbled. So that was Devin Manning with the Delaware State Housing Authority, and I believe she passed it on to Brandy Nauman.
Hi everyone, Brandy Nauman with Sussex County Community Development and Housing. I'm on the CoC board and I'm here just to learn. Thank you.
Thanks, Brandy. Carol, how are you? Oh, that's okay. I just decided to pass it to Carol for you.
Hi, I'm Carol Carr. I'm from the Ministry of Caring.
Thanks, Carol.
I'll pass it to John.
Thank you, Carol. Good morning. John Bates, Minister of Caring. Good morning. I'll pass it along to, is that Fred?
Fred, yep.
Hey, I'm Fred Banuelos. I'm with the Federal Home Loan Bank, and I will pass it along to Aaron Gallagher.
Hi, I'm Erin. I'm the CoC Program Manager with Housing Alliance Delaware. I am going to pass it to Christy.
Good morning, Christy Phelps, here with Connections. And who hasn't been called on? Holly.
Hi, I'm Holly Johnson, also with Connections. And I'll pass it to Stacy.
Hi, good morning. This is Stacy Schamberger. I'm not camera ready, so, but I'm the new director with Lifelines through Weston Neighborhood House.
Nice to meet you, Stacy. Thanks for joining.
No problem.
I'm going to pass it to Deborah. Deborah F. It looks like we might have two Deborahs.
No, I'm Deborah Fletcher, and I am the new rapid rehousing case manager with Child Inc. And I can't see everyone, so you can pass it on to the other Deborah, I guess.
Nice to meet you, Deborah. I'm going to pass it along to Deborah Crossan. Yes.
I am Deborah Crossan with Connections. I just joined a few minutes late, so I have no idea who's been.
Not a problem. I'll pass it for you along to Caitlin.
Hi, I'm Caitlin Douglas. I'm the program assistant for domestic violence services with Child Inc.
Great. Nice to meet you, Caitlin. And I think we had one more person left. We had a Renee on the line, but she is no longer with us. So we can go ahead and get started. So thanks everyone for joining. I know you didn't really have a choice as this is the 2020 Continuum of Care Renewal mandatory meeting. I am going to go ahead and start sharing my screen and pull up a PowerPoint. So Housing Alliance is going to present some information about the process, about the 2020 renewal process, and then we're going to hand it over to Christy, who we did not call on. Sorry, Christine. She is the consultant that's been working closely with us, with the Continuum of Care Board, and with the Continuum of Care Scoring Committee to do a lot of work to help us prepare for the 2020 funding competition. So we are very thankful to have her supporting us this year, and she's been doing really great work for us, and she's going to be presenting some more detail about the CoC funding policies and the scoring tools. So that's really how the presentation is going to work. Housing Alliance will start. Christy will take over and finish us out. I am going to ask again that everyone, if you're not speaking, just to go ahead and mute yourselves so that we don't have any background noise. We will have time at the end for question and answer, but we also, if you have something specific, for my part anyway, if you have a question and you feel like you need, you want to ask it while we're going through, that's probably the easiest way with a group this size. So feel free to use, I think I'll be able to see it when I'm sharing my screen. Use like the hand raising function, or even just unmute yourself and say, hey, before you go on to the next slide, Rachel, I have a question, to make sure that we don't let any questions go. So I'm going to go ahead and start presentation. Okay, so as I said, welcome to the 2020 renewal launch meeting. So we're going to give you a bit of an update of what's going on at the federal level with the CoC. When I say a bit of an update, I mean, there's not much to say. We don't know a lot. We're going to talk about the scoring committee, the renewal agencies, and then really primarily I'm going to focus on the funding process to make sure everyone's clear on deadlines and what they need to do. And then, as I said, Christy will take over and talk in detail about the policies and the tools. So the federal update is that we have no information from HUD. There's been no official guidance put out about the Continuum of Care funding process at the federal level and how they're planning to manage that. Like many things, the competition has been delayed due to coronavirus. There have been discussions about possibly simplifying the process in a number of ways. One way they've talked about doing that is actually removing the collaborative application part and only having folks come in to submit renewal applications. So, and not having new funding as part of that process, which makes things more challenging. So in terms of ranking and reallocation and scoring and all that stuff. So those things have been talked about by folks, but at the federal level, If you could do me a favor and just make sure to mute yourself if you're not talking, that would be great. But we really don't know much of anything. And we could know as of this afternoon, or we could not know for another few weeks. This is just kind of where we are. And so we want to make sure that we go through a thorough evaluation process this year of our renewal projects, and that we're ready to go when we hear from HUD. These are the scoring committee members for 2020. We have a couple of folks here with us today who are scoring committee members. That's just for your information. And renewal agencies, there are 7 agencies coming in for renewal projects this year. So you should all see your agency listed there. All right, so let's talk about process, important dates and deadlines. So on the 14th, we launched the process electronically by releasing all of the materials for you, the scoring and evaluation tools, the compliance tools. We'll talk in more detail about all of those. The deadline for CMIS data cleanup was yesterday. For making sure that data in CMIS is all cleaned up so that we can begin the evaluation process using the CMIS APRs for your renewal projects. Today, July 30th, is the mandatory renewal meeting. Here we are. And August 28th at 4 p.m. is the deadline for submission of all renewal project evaluation materials. We anticipate that the scoring committee will be reviewing projects and scores, renewal projects and scores in September, and that we would be able to finalize scores by October. These are projections, but that's just to give you a general timeline and sense of where we're going. So the APRs that we're using this year, this should not be news to anyone because we've gone through the data cleanup process. You all have gone through the data cleanup process, but the APRs are all on the standard time frame of 4/1/2019 to 3/31/2020. Given that yesterday was the deadline for cleanup, you will be receiving each of your projects' individual final APRs after today's meeting from Aaron, and we are going to be using those will be the final and official APRs that will be being used that you need to use when completing the renewal evaluation tool, and that will be used by Housing Alliance when reviewing the evaluation tools and the scores. So these are the final APRs that need to be used for each one of your individual projects when completing the renewal evaluation tools. Housing Alliance Delaware, as I said, will use those APRs as well when performing an internal review. All of that information will be provided to scoring committee members to finalize project outcomes. So what do you need to submit? So required submission materials for renewal projects. For each renewal project, you need to submit a completed project evaluation tool, as well as the supplemental documentation with that tool, which are the project's policies and procedures. And the detailed information about what what is expected to be in those policies and procedures is explained in the evaluation tool itself. You also need to submit a completed compliance tool for every project. For some of you, you only have one. For others, you have many. So a completed compliance tool for each renewal project, as well as the supplemental documentation that goes along with each compliance tool, which includes the grantee certification, which had not, erroneously, that document had not been distributed with our original launch email. That document is now up on the Housing Alliance Delaware Continuum of Care website for you to use and complete. You also need to submit an ELOCS screenshot of all drawdowns made on the grant during the most recently completed grant term, as well as drawdowns made on the project during the current operating grant term. As well as the project's data entry policies and procedures. And for the ELOCS screenshots, you will see in the evaluation tool itself instructions if you need them or if they would be helpful for you for how to pull those ELOCS screenshots out of ELOCS and where to look to find them. If it's applicable to your project, you would also be asked to submit a letter of intent to voluntarily reallocate or a recent HUD monitoring report. And those are only if they are applicable to your project. If your project is a first-time renewal, and we have taken the liberty of listing your project here, if you are a first-time renewal, meaning a project that has not yet been in operation for 12 months, so that includes Child Inc.'s Domestic Violence Rapid Rehousing Project and Family Promises newly funded, although it's coming in as a renewal this year, Pathway to Housing Rapid Rehousing Project. You are not able to submit many of those things and do not need to. What you need to submit by the August 28th deadline are the project's policies and procedures and the completed compliance tool, as well as the grantee certification and a letter of intent to voluntarily reallocate, again, only if applicable. So those are the things that need to be submitted for first-time renewal projects. Because these projects are new and are not yet, well, they may be just starting to operate, they may have only been operating for a few months, or they may not even be fully in operation yet. We would ask you to look at the expectations in the evaluation tool or tools around what is expected to be in a project's policies and procedures. And include those things prior to submission. But this also gives us at Housing Alliance an opportunity to review the project's policies and procedures and offer recommendations, which we plan to do. And so that's, given that I think at least one of those projects may not even be operating yet, this is an opportunity to get a little bit of feedback and technical assistance on the development of those policies and procedures. They are not being used at this time to evaluate the program. How to submit, as we said, deadline is Friday, August 28th at 4 p.m. We ask that all materials be submitted electronically via email to Erin. Some of you who have many projects may also have many documents, may have a lot of documentation to submit. So if you have any questions about how to submit specifically or the best format to do that in, or if the file sizes are very large, anything like that, please do just communicate with Erin about that. If you have multiple renewal projects, it would be best if you submitted each project and all of its documentation in its own email versus trying to send things all at once. It will help us and you keep organized. But please do feel free to reach out to Erin on any submission details. So just a little bit about the review process that happens after submission, and this will get discussed more by Christy in reviewing the CoC funding policies, but we do at Housing Alliance Delaware perform internal reviews of all the project's APRs and evaluation tools to confirm outcomes, and we complete a preliminary scoring tool for each project. Only on those metrics that are scored using APR data. So for all of the data-based metrics in the scoring tool, we review what you submit, we review the final APR, and we complete a preliminary scoring tool for that project that is then passed on to the scoring committee along with the backup information and data. The scoring committee meets, determines project scores, looks at some of those other non-data related scoring items, and then those recommendations for finalizing project scores get sent to the CoC board for final determination. There is a formal appeals process that's been put in place in the CoC funding policies and procedures this year that Christy will review, but that's just a little bit about the process that will occur after your submission. So that concludes the Housing Alliance portion of the presentation today. Christy's going to do all the heavy lifting for us. So does anyone have any questions at this time before I pass it over to Christy? Okay. Well, thank you. And Christy, I hand it over to you.
Okay, hopefully everyone is seeing my screen. I shared it. Again, my name is Christy Rubenstein. Some of you, I think, have been on calls with me already, but some of you have not. I work at Diana T. Myers and Associates. We provide consulting services to COCs, and worked with your COC last year, the Delaware COC, and are working again this year, sort of in different capacities, but working on the scoring and evaluation process, and also the policies. And so, as Rachel said, I'm going to walk us through the 2020 CoC funding policy document, and then walk through the elements of the renewal evaluation tool, and talk a little bit about the scoring as well as part of that. So let's keep moving forward. Just make sure. Okay. So again, we're going to focus primarily when we talk about the funding policy on changes from 2019, and cover the different parts of that policy, which used to be sort of different documents that have all been pulled together. So we'll talk about that. And then just to be clear, when we go through the evaluation and scoring tools, we're really going to be focused on the permanent supportive housing, rapid rehousing, transitional housing, and the transitional to rapid joint component project types. There are also evaluation scoring tools for the CE, the SSOCE, and HMIS. Those really are for HAD, and so we're not going to get into those today. They're quite different from the housing-related project types. And again, I'll focus primarily on significant changes from 2019 to this version that you're seeing, touching base on the generalities of them, but really pointing out where something is different from last year, so that you all are aware of that. And then we'll have time for Q&A. Because some of these things are really specific, feel free to ask questions along. I don't feel like this is necessarily going to be one of those presentations where we're building and I'll be saying like, oh, I'm going to answer that question later. These are pretty discrete. And so if you have a question, or we're talking either about one section of the policies, feel free to unmute yourself, or use the chat function, or to raise your hand or something like that to ask your question. All right, so moving along. There are many sort of pieces of the funding policy, and we're going to talk through those, but they include prioritization and ranking, new project solicitation, evaluation and selection, renewal project evaluation, reallocation, appeals, and conflicts of interest. Again, I just want to highlight that I don't think a lot has changed in terms of the policies and the processes used. It's more that things were in sort of different documents and places, and we worked to pull all of this information together in one document that really covers most of everything, to make it a bit easier for all of you to just be able to have a document to go to that would reference sort of everything there was to know about renewal and new project evaluation and ranking and scoring and funding. So I'll talk through where the certain things were pulled from in prior, what the document might have been in prior years, and where it's a little different as we talk through this. Okay, so the initial opening page of the funding policy is just a description of like basically background of the CoC NOFA competition. And that's just really a very basic overview. It talks a little bit about like why we do this, why we have this process at all, and outlines roles for various CoC decision-making bodies, really the scoring committee and the board in particular. It talks, and sort of is just a general introduction to the rest of the document. So I don't think there are probably any questions about that one. All right, so when we move to the next section, this is where we get to some of the meat. It's the project prioritization and ranking policy is the next section in the document. And this is really about sort of the sort of general framework under which the scoring committee and the board are going to be considering how to rank projects on the priority list. And hopefully most of you are familiar with this. If anyone is not and needs a little bit more of a basic primer, I would suggest reaching out to Erin about things like the priority list. But in general, the concept is that all renewal and new projects get ranked by the CoC. Getting a number 1 means you're the top ranked. And that HUD would use that to determine which projects get funding, with a certain number of projects sort of being safe. Those are tier 1 projects. And then projects in tier 2 are part of a national competition. We don't know what all of the stuff related to COVID means for the competition this year, obviously. We are proceeding here with the idea that we're gonna just kind of go about this as if it were a normal year in case HUD says, go forth and rank all your projects. So this policy here is really designed to help guide the board and the scoring committee in terms of how to go about ranking projects. And what really this part of the document carried from FY19 was a document that was called the FY19 Prioritization of Projects document. Very minimal changes, so I don't think for those of you who are familiar with the ranking process will be surprised by how this plays out. It's really what we did was tighten up some of the language and make clear certain projects were going to be ranked in tier 1 and sort of try to specify why. So again, the document assigns some duties to the scoring committee, provides a basic overview of areas for which projects will be reviewed, sort of general categories. That's really things like, on performance, that kind of stuff. And the most significant change, again, is to clarify which projects are going to be ranked in tier 1. And so, as Rachel alluded to, first year renewals will be ranked in tier 1 because the CoC can't, according to the NOFA rules from the FY19 NOFA, could not reallocate a first year renewal. Because you can't really do a full scoring on a first year renewal anyway, because they don't have a full year of data to really make that a fair evaluation. The other 2 project types that are being included in tier 1 are the SSOCE and HMIS project types. Those are mandated by HUD, activities that you have to have. They're part of the CoC's basic infrastructure. And so the CoC typically would probably rank them in tier 1 anyway to make sure that they're safe, because you need that funding to support those activities. So they will be in tier 1, but with a note that the board and the scoring committee's intent is to, I believe, continue to look at those project types on a more year-round basis and be working with HAD on any improvements that are needed. Ranking within tiers will be based on scores from the scoring tool, the evaluation scoring tool, project performance, and then CoC priorities and local need. So just be aware that at times you will see a ranking that does not necessarily strictly follow the scores. And that is because the board and the scoring committee have some leeway to determine what there might be in terms of priorities for the CoC. And there's often strategy involved in tier 2 ranking, where you have to think very carefully about how to rank projects in order to try to get as much funding as possible for the CoC. So all of that is sort of covered in the prioritization and ranking policy. Any questions on that, folks? Okay. I know it's early in the morning, so I hope everybody's had their coffee. This stuff is pretty dry, but okay. The next section in the document is new project solicitation, evaluation, and selection. So there wasn't really an existing document per se that pertains to the sort of policy stuff. We pulled from a couple of different documents. Really, we had a description of the process and used that to sort of build out the process and the policies and procedures here. The document itself outlines documents that should be submitted by applicants and a general process for handling the applications. Again, all of that was written down. It just wasn't necessarily put into this funding policy document. So we just sort of pulled all that together, and that's enumerated really in this policy. So if you're interested, I think you might be interested if new project funding becomes available, it's worth sort of taking a look at that to just familiarize yourself with what might be required of you for submission. The document, this part of the document also assigns duties to HAD and the scoring committee and the CoC board to try to really say, like, provide direction around here's the process. So HAD is going to be the agency that collects and reviews applications for new projects for eligibility requirements. The scoring committee is going to be the body that reviews eligibility, scores the projects, and then they're going to meet and make selection and ranking recommendations that go onto the board, and then it's the board's duty to review those recommendations and make final decisions. There's also a list on the slide of the new project evaluation factors. So these are all also listed within the policy, just to be really clear and provide sort of transparency and clear guidance around what the project's applications are expected to cover, and also what the scoring committee and the board are going to be looking at in terms of when they're looking to evaluate these projects. Any questions on that part? Okay, so I know everyone here is really renewal projects. So this part is really what pertains to you, to all of you. Again, we took a description of the process, clarified it further, working with, obviously this is all working with closely with the scoring committee, and had to say, okay, how does it really work? And let's make sure that we're clear what the process and the policies are. Again, in the blue box, you can see the evaluation factors that are listed within the policies document. And we have their application submission. Of course, Rachel went over this. You're required to submit everything that's asked for and to submit on time. But it also includes financials and compliance, and then also evaluation on performance. So the document really tries to be very clear about what belongs in these different categories, how things will be scored. Well, not necessarily how things will be scored, but what will be scored in terms of like what's considered performance versus what's considered compliance. So that is all in there as part of guidance. Again, I suggest, because you're all renewal agencies, read through that and make sure that you understand what the policies are. Again, duties are assigned to HAD and the scoring committee and the board, with, again, HAD being the body, the agency that's going to collect information and review for threshold requirements, and also, as Rachel talked about, do some preliminary check of the data and the scoring. And all that stuff then goes on to the scoring committee, and it's their charge to evaluate all projects using the tools, the evaluation tools, scoring tools. They're ultimately going to make recommendations for ranking reallocation and projects needing a corrective action plan. And then that goes on to the CoC board, and they are going to review the scoring committee's recommendations, and they make the final kind of decisions around reallocation, scoring, and ranking. There's a separate reallocation policy, but it is referenced in here because obviously there's a connection between performance at times and reallocation. And then we provide that agencies have the right to appeal scoring, and that's covered in the appeal policy section. that I believe used to be built into a description in the evaluation tool. So for anybody who looked at those evaluation tools and was wondering where that went, it migrated over into this funding policy document, and we'll talk about that in a bit. This document doesn't get into the specifics and details. That's really what the evaluation and scoring tools are for, and the compliance tool is for. But it just, again, provides a sort of broad overview of these are the things that are going to be included as part of the evaluation, the overall evaluation of the project. Any questions on that? Okay. And again, if people have questions along the way, something occurs to you, feel free to type it into the chat box and we'll get to that. Reallocation policy. This was a separate document in 2019. We pulled it into here and tried to just be more specific and provide clarification around how reallocation works or will work. And they're really sort of different processes depending upon whether the reallocation is voluntary, which means you as an agency decide, I don't really want to do this project anymore, and I'm going to let the CoC know. And so the process really does say, agency, you need to notify the CoC if you want to voluntarily reallocate. You're to do that in writing, and you're going to have to provide your reasons. That information goes to HAD as the CoC lead agency, and then they would provide that to the board. And then there would be further contact with the agency that wants to voluntarily reallocate to discuss really why and what that's going to look like. And it would kind of move forward from there. The other scenario is that the project does not meet threshold requirements or the CoC's established needs and priorities or HUD priorities any longer. And in that case, the scoring committee would determine which projects aren't meeting threshold or are no longer meeting needs or priorities of the CoC or HUD's priorities, and send a list of recommended reallocation to the CoC board. And they're required under this policy to outline the reasons very specifically why they are recommending reallocation. So that all would be included in a document that would go to the board would review it and make their own sort of final determination regarding reallocations. And reallocation can be full or partial. So in the case of full reallocation, it would be taking all of the funds from the project, but there are also plenty of times where there are partial reallocations, that is a portion of the project's funds are taken out of the project. And so all this applies to both full and partial reallocation. Agencies are provided with the right to appeal reallocation decisions. And so again, that's also in the appeal policy. The policy, the reallocation policy, also goes on to talk about what would happen with those reallocated funds. And so there are different scenarios that might play out depending upon sort of why something is reallocated. If an agency is voluntarily reallocating, or the funds have been reallocated due to the project no longer meeting CoC or HUD needs and priorities, the board will sort of have the ability to give those funds back to that same agency for another use. That is something the board could decide to do. Otherwise, the funds would get released into sort of the new project as part of new project funding available to all agencies within the CoC for that, that year. The CoC, depending on timing and how all this plays out, and depending on the sort of type of project it was, there are lots of considerations that might factor in. The CoC might use its sort of regular annual new project bidding and solicitation process, but the CoC might also determine that it would need to issue out a specific solicitation and separate sort of bidding process for that pot of funds. So all of that would be a sort of conversation and decision made by the board, really, probably, and the scoring committee. There is recusal language also in the reallocation policy. So anybody with a conflict can't participate. That includes can't participate in conversations about the grants that they have, and any board members who also have projects and might have a conflict cannot participate in reallocation decisions. Any questions about the reallocation policy? Okay. The appeal policy. We created a general appeal policy in this sort of overall funding document instead of policies being embedded in individual tools in order to just be very clear about what appeals would be allowed and to sort of streamline that. So appeals under this policy are allowed for project scoring errors. This is the way really to rectify if your agency believes that the scoring committee had whoever as part of this process made a mistake in the scoring. And also reallocation, as just discussed, you can appeal a reallocation decision. Of course, the CoC does not take lightly funds being removed from a project, and so the ability to have an appeal option is there. And then there's this sort of third catch-all improper application interpretation of HUD CoC rules and regulations concerning the participation of the applicant in the CoC application process. So that's a general process kind of if you think the process wasn't followed properly. Agencies will have 3 days from the decision to submit the appeal. That means, so scoring is released, you have 3 days to submit your appeal. You get a letter about a reallocation decision. You have 3 days from.
Excuse me.
Yeah.
Is that 3 working days or 3 days period?
Aaron, do you happen to know? I think it's meant to be 3 working days, but I'm not sure.
Rachel, do you know?
I believe it's 3 business days, like 3 working days. So if the decision goes out on Thursday, then you would have until Monday to get that decision. So you would have Thursday, Friday, Monday.
Thank you.
No problem. Any other questions on that? And then that appeal will need to be submitted in writing. And the CoC will have a funding appeal form that is to be used to submit that in writing. So that would direct you who to submit it to and all that. And it will provide guidance on what should be submitted to be included with the appeal. The CoC board, the non-conflicted members only, will have 7 days to investigate, follow up with the agency submitting the appeal, and then respond to the appeal in writing with their decision. Because of the NOFA timelines, this can be done electronically if need be. That's also included in the policy document. And the agencies can also follow HUD's appeal process. That is typically section 10, I believe, of the CoC NOFA in any given year. But it is typically at the back of the CoC NOFA, so an agency can also make use of that appeal process as well. Any questions on the appeal policy? Conflict of interest policy, this is pretty straightforward. Again, it's embedded in this document. What is really helpful is it does provide examples of the kinds of conflicts of interest that might occur. So I, again, encourage folks to read through that, to think carefully about if you're part of a decision-making body, do you have any conflicts? What is required is that board members complete the form no less than annually, so you have to complete it every year. And if a conflict were to arise after you completed the form and submitted it, but in the course of your work to notify the CoC immediately and to make that conflict known. Where there is a conflict, the board member cannot participate in discussions or voting on matters in which you have a conflict. Yeah, it's pretty clear. The lead agency is barred from participating or discussing or voting on matters where there are decisions to be made about funding for the projects that they administer and are the applicant for. And so that would be HMIS, SSOCE, potentially planning, but it is really, that one's, you're gonna get that money. Any questions on the conflict of interest policy? Okay. And then the last section, corrective action plans. So this really outlines a process by which agencies are given a corrective action plan for a project. And it's worth reading if you suspect that your agency might get a corrective action plan at some point. For sure, I think it's always worth reading all the policies of the CoC, but that's not everybody's thing. HAD is responsible for assisting in the development of a corrective action plan. And the policy really does detail, you know, what needs to be included in that corrective action plan. And so that includes performance, identifying the performance issue, performance goals, specifying activities that need to be addressed in order to correct those performance issues, who the responsible party is going to be to undertake those activities, and by when those activities need to be completed. The agency is responsible for obviously implementing changes needed to address performance, and HAD is to meet with the agency to discuss the corrective action plan to make sure it's clear what the contents are, the plan, the deadlines, all that stuff is meant to be a process of engagement with the agency. HAD may also provide TA and might also refer the agency to work or seek TA from HUD. And HAD's responsibility is also to perform regular check-ins with the agency. And then the scoring committee would be notified when an agency is placed on a corrective action plan and continuing progress on that in order to really understand if there's anything going on within the corrective action plan and performance that's going to impact decisions that they might make around funding. So that is the corrective action plan policy. Any questions on that? I don't know if we have anything coming up in the chat box. So we did have somebody ask a question about appeal scoring errors. Aaron and Rachel, are you guys, okay, you're on it.
Yeah, so a question other folks might be interested if they haven't been watching the chat box was that, so I'll provide that out loud. If agencies can appeal scoring errors, does that mean that individual scoring sheets from the committee will be provided when the ranking is released? So yeah, when scores are released, when the final scores are released, that will include the final scoring tool. Each agency will receive their scoring tool that shows the final score on each item. Yes, was the answer.
Thank you.
Yep.
Okay, so I think with that, we're done with the funding policy document. Any lingering questions folks have about that document and how it's how it will play out in real life? I suspect that for most of you who are familiar with the process, it'll feel pretty much the same. But I think with some tightening up of the process and things like being able to appeal scoring errors, I think that's going to be helpful to make sure everybody's feeling good and well, maybe not feeling good, but at least understands where the scores came from and why things are done the way they're done. Okay, so we'll move along to the CoC Renewal Project Evaluation and Scoring Tools Review. Again, hope you have coffee or tea, whatever is the thing for you to stay awake. But this might be the part that feels the most pertinent for those of you who are have renewal projects. So feel free as we go along here to stop me if you have any questions about a specific scoring criterion to make sure that we're all clear. Okay, so the evaluation tools have been released and posted on the HAD website under the CoC section. There are specific tools for each project type, and I guess I would say like the biggest major change this year is that there is actually a tool for the transitional to rapid rehousing joint component project type. It did not, I don't believe, exist prior to this, so so we put one together. There are, I think, minor changes throughout, and as we talk through here, I'm going to note some of those changes, but mostly it's more clarifications of things rather than anything big or substantive that has changed. Again, the evaluation tool as compared to the compliance tool, the evaluation tool really covers the project performance areas. And so a lot of it is going to be driven by APR data. And so throughout the tool, there are tables where you're charged with, entering in your CoC's APR data, and that is, as Rachel said earlier, the APR that HAD is going to run and provide to you, because we've all had time to clean up your data, and now we're entering into the next phase. So I think the tool itself, when you get in there, it's like prior years. It should be pretty easy to use, but if anybody had any issues, feel free to reach out to Erin, and she can help troubleshoot. Okay. This table is really just a look at all of the criteria across all of the project types and how they're scored for each project type for each criteria. So you'll see that there are NAs where certain criteria just don't apply to those project types. And so I will be noting throughout here which project types are covered under each criterion that we discuss. There's probably the biggest shift is from PSH to all the others. There's certain things that PSH projects are scored on that the rapid NTH, it just doesn't make sense to do that. And other than that, I think that this chart's just really a reference point. Again, we're going to be sharing these slides. All right, so every evaluation tool has a section for agency and project information. It's pretty self-explanatory. Don't forget to fill it out, I guess, is the main issue. It's a little bit more robust for some project types, a few more questions than for some of the others, so just be aware of that. Be sure to complete all the questions and make sure that you get your signed certification as part of that document. Jumping into the criteria, the first question for everybody, and this applies to every project type, is around data quality. This one is a couple of changes. The biggest difference from 2019 is that we added in income at annual assessment as part of the table of things to be reviewed. This one it hadn't been included in prior versions because I believe you guys don't really look at income for stayers, or hadn't in the past. However, HUD certainly does. It is part of the SPMs that income be reported both for stayers and leavers in order to ensure that the CoC is submitting quality data as part of the SPMs, we want to make sure that when annual assessments are due, that they are being completed. Again, annual assessments are only done for participants who are in the project for 365 days or more. So if you are a rapid rehousing project that cycles most people out before a year, this is, you probably aren't doing the annual assessments. But for PSH projects, for other project types, this is going to be important for folks to do. The scoring has also changed. It used to be all or nothing for this particular one, meaning that you met the less than 5% error rate benchmark for all of these elements, and you got 10 points, or you didn't and you got 0 points. So we've tweaked the scoring, and you can now get partial points for 10 to 14 of the data elements meeting the benchmark. Any questions on that one before we move ahead? Okay. Housing stability, I'm just showing what it looks like in the tool. It looks a little bit different, and I'll explain why for PSH versus rapid TH and TH to RH. The main reason is that for housing stability, for rapid TH and TH to RH, it is exiting, persons exiting to a positive housing destination. For PSH, we add in retained in the project. That is not a change. That is the way it has been. And the scoring has not changed. The biggest change is really on the data side, I think, for folks who hopefully you've grown familiar with the latest version of the APR. The data was previously pulled from 2 tables that are not there anymore. So they've been consolidated into one data table in the APR, and that's question 23C. This aligns the CoC APR with the ESG CAPER actually a little bit better. So that is part of why that is. And I just wanted to note that there are 4 destinations that are not part of the permanent housing destinations, but are excluded from the calculation for the percent of persons moving to a positive housing destination. And those are folks who exited to foster care home or group foster care home, hospital or other residential non-psychiatric medical facility, long-term care facility or nursing home, and deceased. So no worries, those folks aren't going to be included in the measure. They are pulled out when the calculation is done. Do we have any questions on that one? Maybe there's some stuff in the chat box. No, okay. So again, no real big changes here from the prior year. Length of stay. This only applies to the TH and TH to RH program component types, project component types. What is different this year is that we are collecting both the average length of stay for leavers and for stayers. The only thing that's going to be scored is, as it has been in the past, the leavers. We will collect the data for stayers and sort of assess whether it makes sense to include that in scoring in future years. I believe there were no real changes here in terms of the scoring. Do note that for the new TH to RH component, it is worth fewer points, and that is because we're combining really some elements of the TH and the rapid evaluations for TH to RH. So while this is worth 10 points for TH, it's only 5 points for the TH to RH. Okay, any questions on that one? Everybody's favorite, I know this is everybody's favorite, increased income for leavers. So this one, I have 2 slides here. We are asking for increased income for leavers. That is the scored element for this year. We also have, we are asking for data on stayers. It's, again, not scored. It's very clearly stated it's not scored, but we are going to look at the data to see, again, if it makes sense to score in this in future years. It is, both are part of the CoC's SPMs, and that have to be submitted to HUD. So looking at including stayers for future years. The major difference here is that for rapid TH and TH to RH, we're looking at the rate of adult leavers who increase their income. For PSH only, we add in the adults who also maintained their income. So that is how this is set up. So just be aware, if you're a PSH project, you get to add those folks in who maintained. If you are not, if you're one of the other project types, that information is not asked for in the evaluation tool. The scoring is different depending on project type here. So PSH, this criterion is only worth 5 points. For rapid, it is worth 15. And for TH to, and TH to RH, it is 10 points. I don't believe there were any really big shifts here in the scoring thresholds. And again, and we're collecting the data on the stayers, but you're not going to be scored on that data. I always give a little note to folks just when you're looking at your APR on this particular one to just be really careful that you're pulling the right data. I think table 19 for question 19A2 on the APR is a little tricky. There are a lot of columns and a lot of rows, and so just take your time with that one. It's pretty easy to sort of write down the wrong number there. Any questions on the income before we move on? Okay. Bed and utilization. This is for PSH, TH, and TH to rapid. It is not for the rapid. We don't score on this. Bed and unit utilization, as you see in the box here, you have nothing to put in. This information is calculated from CMIS, and so you do not have to enter in any data. Nothing here has really changed from the prior year. I should say, are there any questions about that one before I move on? Length of time from project enrollment to move-in. This applies to the rapid and TH to rapid projects. You have to fill in this table. Again, take your time with this. HAD will definitely be rechecking this data to make sure everything's sort of been calculated appropriately. There are no real changes here. I just want to flag that the scoring's a little different, I think, than some other criteria. It's full points for the percent of persons housed within 30 days, and then partial points, the 5 points for the percent of persons housed within 60 days. And so you're asked to pull that information in from the APR. So again, take your time, because really what this is drawing from is a table where you're going to have to add up some values. So make sure that you understand what you need to add up and fill in the table. Any questions on that one?
I have a question. Sure. In regards to that last slide.
Let me see if I can get it back. There we go.
So the COVID moratorium that's happening now, is there a plan, or how will that impact our next application? You know what I mean?
In terms of getting people into housing?
Yes, and the points here, especially for rapid, because folks aren't really moving as quickly as they have in the past. So just curious in regards to the 30 days and the 60 days with the moratorium for the availability of housing inventory? What will they look like, or are there any allowances for COVID?
I think that's a really good question. I think part of this is what the review period covers. And Erin, does it go to the
No. Well, yeah, I was just going to say, so the review period for this does not cover any period during COVID. It ends on 3/31/2020. So for this year's data, we wouldn't anticipate there would be any impact. I think that is definitely something that will need to be considered next year. And going forward is what the impact of COVID-19 might have across the board for everyone's projects.
Okay, just curious.
Yeah, that's a good question.
Yeah, obviously next year is going to be it's going to be interesting because there's a lot of stuff happening this year that we'll have to think through. But hopefully, as Rachel said, there's minimal impact this year for this year's evaluation process. Housing first. So the question here is not APR dependent. This is really one where agencies are going to be submitting their policies and procedures and also a narrative. And those policies, procedures, and narrative will be reviewed by the scoring committee. There's no real change to this one, except we did sort of tighten up, I think, some of the language in the scoring tool description around what 10 points is for and what 5 points. And this one is really calling on you to, I think, have really strong policies, procedures, and a narrative that provides a really good explanation of how you abide by Housing First policies and principles within your project. This was scored in this manner last year as well, I believe. So hopefully the scoring committee, I believe they learned some things by doing it last year. And so this year, hopefully it's also a stronger evaluation process. Any questions on Housing First? Again, this one applies to all project types. Everybody's supposed to be following Housing First models. And similarly, low barrier access. Again, you're going to submit policies, procedures, and a narrative, and that's going to be reviewed by the scoring committee. This is not dependent on data, but it is dependent upon your policies and procedures and narrative really pointing in the direction that you have low barrier access to your programs. Any questions on this one? Okay, the next couple apply only to PSH. We're getting into some of the severity of need, and then we'll do a flip where there's some severity of need that, actually the next one is for PSH, and then the two following are not applied to PSH. Disabling conditions. So my note here really is that the APR question 13A2 is different this year in the latest version of the APR than it was in previous ones. There are many more columns. So again, when you are pulling the data, just make sure you're matching up what is asked for in the table here. Unfortunately for all of you, it went from being like, I think like 2 or 3 data points to like, I don't know, however many, or 10. So just again, take your time when you're looking at the APR question. Be aware that this is rate of adults with 1+ disabling conditions at start. There are 3 different tables. There's start, exit, and current. So this is for start. The difference also this year is how it is scored. Because the way it was changed in the APR, you're now able to see adults in different kinds of household types. But we want to make sure that we're accommodating PSH projects that serve families. So you'll look at projects primarily serving adult-child households. The thresholds are a little bit different for the point values. It's a little more forgiving with the understanding that you might have two-parent households where one of them is not, does not have a disabling condition, so we're trying to account for that there. For the adult-only households, the scoring the thresholds were bumped up a little bit with the understanding that most of the folks in your program, adult-only program, are going to have a disabling condition because it is PSH. Any questions on that? Severity of need, fleeing DV. Again, it does not apply to PSH, but does apply to the other project types. This wasn't really changed from prior versions. Again, we're looking at the households fleeing DV. And just notice that you should use question 14B and not 14A. 14B is a subset of 14A, so just make sure you're using 14B. And other than that, there's, and not even that, that's just a note of things to watch out for, nothing really different from the prior evaluation tool question. Any questions on that one? The other severity of need for rapid TH and TH/RH is zero income at entry. Again, this is the rate of adults with zero cash income at project start. No real changes here, so don't expect anybody. There's nothing really to flag on this one so much, but if folks have questions, let me know. Participation in CoC planning. This is applicable to all project types and really looks at your status as a voting member and the number of CoC meetings you've attended. Perhaps you within the agency keep amazing records and will know exactly how many meetings your agency attended. Perhaps you will not, in which case you can reach out to HAD and they will be able to provide that information to you. The only major change here was to the scoring tool side, which was really just cleaning up the language a little bit on the scoring to just clarify that if you're a voting member and you have 4 CoC meetings, you'll get full points. If you're not a voting member but you attended at least 2 meetings, you can get partial points, and otherwise you will not be receiving points. Any questions on this one? Okay, support services, again, this applies to all the project types, but the point values are different. Only for TH/RH, it has a lower point value because TH/RH, we had to combine elements of the TH evaluation with elements of the rapid. So this one's worth 5 points, and for everybody else, it's 10. This really hasn't changed from prior years. I don't even know if like the scoring changed so much. Again, this one is not going to be APR dependent. This is, you're going to write a narrative. Write a compelling narrative around the support services you provide. I believe we did up the point value on this one for TH. Any questions on that one? All right, chronic homeless priority, PSH only. Again, this is not APR data, but you are going to have to provide HAD with information, with the CoC with information on the number of CoC funded beds in the project and which how many are dedicated to chronic. It says here number of beds prioritized for chronic upon turnover. I just put a note here that that for HUD's purposes, we're now sort of moving to just dedicated. But if you still have like a designation of prioritized, that can be put in here. No real changes on this one from prior years. Any questions? Chronically homeless households served. For this one, this is APR driven, again, only PSH, and we're gonna be looking at the number of chronically homeless persons by household. That's in the back half of the APR. There is a space here for any agency that has a non-chronic person in their PSH project, but was sort of given a quote unquote waiver from centralized intake for that person to go in. You can explain that, explain the circumstances of that. It does ask for you to include the CMS ID number for the households that you're referencing, and that's going to be checked against the CI records. So just know this particularly applies to projects that are serving HIV/AIDS participants who have HIV/AIDS, and that has just to do with other stuff related to that. But just note that you have that ability to use the narrative box for that purpose.
Can I just jump in real quick, Christy, and just add,
Sure.
there may be instances where a PSH project accepted someone that was being transferred from another PSH project. So that could be a case here as well, where the person might not show up in the data as chronically homeless because their prior living situation was in another permanent supportive housing project, but they were chronic when they entered that one. And so that one's still eligible for that bed, and that's perfectly fine, but they might not show up in the data as chronic. So for projects where that's an issue, also you can describe that and include the CMIS ID for that, that client or household as well. That's it. Thank you.
No, thanks for going over that. Any questions on that one? Okay. Cost effectiveness, not scored. This is not scored, but the CoC does ask for this information to be provided, and the scoring committee will have it accessible for review. Again, this is just filling in the charts with your grant information, client served, and then cost per client served, and then a cost for the other table is permanent housing outcomes. So you'll need to have that information available to you when you go to fill this one out. Questions on cost effectiveness? The rate of project households with a safety plan. This one is has been added. It only applies to the DV specific rapid rehousing project, and I'm not sure that one's even really being scored this year. This is more to give you a heads up that this is a thing that will be looked at in future years. Why HUD asked COCs to evaluate any DV serving projects on the degree to which they improve safety and do safety planning as part of the CoC NOFA. So it is by HUD meant to be something that the CoC does include in rating and ranking, and so hence the question. The scoring committee would review the responses, and it's not obviously going to be APR driven. This is really going to be to the agency to make sure that you have some kind of records around the extent to which you are doing safety planning with the households that you're serving. Are any questions on that one? A new table this year on the budget section is asking for CoC funds, and that's because it was not included. We have heard that there might be a FY20 GIW coming out soonish. What that means in HUD language is really unclear. So right now, what we're asking for is for agencies to input their FY 2019 contract amounts into this table, and it breaks out the different budget line items. So please input that information. It could be a little tricky for some of you. I think if you asked or requested any COVID grant amendments, I don't know if Rachel has thoughts on this. My thought is that you would put in the amount originally awarded, because those grant amendments are, well, actually no, FY19 you don't have any grant amendments yet. There's not a process yet. So put in the amount originally awarded. If they do come out with a process like they did for the FY18 budgets, those are meant to be temporary and not ongoing. So if you would input your contracted amount, that would be great. So that's the review of the tools. Any questions folks have now that we've gone through the whole document? I know it's scintillating stuff. Once you get into it, questions might arise. If they do and you're not quite sure how to fill out something or what to put in, be sure to reach out to Erin, who can provide assistance on that. And hopefully the tools are, I believe, available as Word documents for you to fill in. And hopefully all that is easy enough to complete, just logistically. Any other questions, thoughts, concerns?
So someone asked in the chat box what the GIW means. Could you explain that real quick?
Oh,
This is
right.
a new
The grant inventory
not had to turn GIW yet.
Sorry, the GIW is the grant inventory worksheet. It is a Excel spreadsheet, essentially, that HUD puts out every year as we move toward a NOFA that lists all the projects awarded funds from basically the prior round. So like the FY20 GIW would reflect the FY19 CoC awards. And what it does is it breaks down every project by, like, it shows all of your budget line items. And if you have like rental assistance and even for some others, it'll show the number of units by unit size, 1 bedroom, 2 bedroom, that kind of stuff, and gives us the total annual renewal amount. And the reason why this is important is because when you put in your project budget originally in FY19, you were using probably, I think, FY18 FMRs, right? And then when HUD does the award, what they do is they give you like then the next year's FMR amounts. They update the amounts. So the amounts that we put in for the CoC in FY19 are then adjusted. And so having the GIW is helpful because we can see what everybody's budget actually ended up being for the FY19 contract year. And because we don't have a GIW, really, I would have to ask all of you to provide that as you go in toward contracting, especially on the budget line item side. Any other questions?
It looks like there's a question that I think Erin will have to answer. It says, will the APRs be distributed today?
Yes, they will be out by the end of the day, by close of business.
So I don't know if, Rachel, I'll turn it over to you to wrap up. And hopefully I say good luck to everybody. We're in a strange year, but hopefully we can all move through this process. And hopefully the policy document and the evaluation tools are simple enough for folks to follow, use, and help really understand and guide the process.
Thank you, Christy. I found that to be very helpful. I hope folks did when the PowerPoint slides and the recording will be up on the CoC website for your reference as you're going through the tools. Please feel free to use that as a reference. Also, please feel free to reach out to Erin for technical assistance questions about the data and the APR, anything that you come across as you're going through the tools and working to fill them out, or trying to determine exactly how to submit what. Please get all those technical questions, feel free to reach out to Aaron on any of that. One thing that we did not mention is we are not, in case anyone was curious, we are not asking or requiring folks to submit any fees for applications this year. That was intentionally not included. It was not erroneously not included. So just in case anyone had any questions about that, there will be no fees for applications this year. So if everyone's good, no additional questions, we'll just go ahead and close the meeting today. And I hope that you all found this helpful.
Thanks, Rachel.
Thanks, everyone.
Thank you, Rachel, Christy. Thank you
Good
very much.
afternoon.
Bye, everyone.